Welcome back to the bed build. I'm into installing the oak trim on the plywood bed case. I've had to resort to some compromises that I have mixed feelings about. As you can see, this trim here, this is the top of the bed, so this is the top trim piece. This went on really nicely because this top piece of the cabinet is only 6 inches deep. I was able to glue and clamp this with no further fasteners. This bottom trim piece, however, I've had to use nails. I'm not happy about that. It's just kind of the best way to go at this point. Clamping something that's over 74 inches long is an extremely difficult challenge, particularly working alone. I only have 2 clamps that go that long, and clamping something that's this wide and 74 plus inches long, I just could not see doing a good job of that. So I decided to resort to nails. I've got, I think, 6 nails in each trim piece. This part's upside down, so this is the bottom. And well, it is what it is. They're on there, they're glued on there, they're nailed on there. I'll have to set these nails and then use wood filler to hide them. So, can't say anything more about that. That's just the way it is. You can hear the disappointment in my voice about having to do that. This beautiful white oak, and I've had to drive nails through it. I'm not crazy about that. So this has sat overnight. So I'll take these clamps off. Now that I have the trim installed, I need to trim it. I need to trim the trim. So we just have to get it as square as possible. This little saw, I can run right on the face here and make sure it stays fairly flat, although there are no guarantees. It's sharp, but it doesn't cut really fast. And it cuts on the pull stroke only, which is difficult for me to get accustomed to. Japanese saws cut on the pull stroke. North American saws cut on the push stroke. And I'm intentionally not using the whole length because I want that blade to stay on the material so it stays flat on the material. I'm handicapped here because the plywood is broken away a little bit. So I need to go farther back on the material to get a reference point. I'm going to cut this side so that I don't break out, splinter out my trim piece. Just cut a bit here. That sanding block will touch that up. Now I'm careful not to sand this corner because this piece of trim is going to meet up with that, and I don't want a divot between the two. I want it to be flush as possible. Okay, I'll sand this. You can sand it here, but don't sand over here. Alright, so that's not going to splinter away. And rinse and repeat with this one. Don't be afraid to use hand tools in your woodworking. Sometimes we get so indoctrinated by power tools that we can't think of a solution that involves power tools. Sometimes your solution involves hand tools. A small saw, hand planes, chisels, things like that will be your solution quite often. That'll work. It's not a job for those high-end chisels, but a sharp chisel makes short work of those little squeeze-out lumps of glue. Don't need to get it perfect because you're going to run sander over there anyway. Just get the worst of it off. You can even kind of do a card scraper thing with the chisel to scrape that off. Inevitably, as you progress in your project, sanding is creeping back into the process. Now, just a word about sanding. There are multiple grits of sandpaper available. Where you stop in your grits really has to do with what kind of finish you want on your project, what kind of material you're using, and kind of the purpose for the item you're producing. Most wood products, furniture, etc. for oak, you don't need to go very high. 320 is typically a good number I use for that. But what I wanted to say about sanding is you can get grits as far as 40 grit is not hard to find. And I'm sure some will say, well, you can go lower than that, and I'm sure you can. However, the point is, you get a 40 grit sanding disc, and that's more like driveway gravel. The lowest I normally go is 60, and usually not below 80. And that's because, in my opinion, anything below 100 is for sculpting. If you need to change the shape of something, if you're making a product and you need to make a curve, or you need to make, take out a hump or whatever, if you need to actually change the shape of something, you need a low grit sandpaper. Then you go up from there to finish it off. For this sanding session, I'm using a 100 grit. I'm not trying to change the shape of this. I just want to bring this into a nice plane. We want to make sure there's no sliver hazards here. You're going to be making the bed. You're going to be sliding your hands in here. So this has to be nice and even and smooth. A word about down pressure. I am resting my hand on this, but I'm not pushing down on it like I would if I were drilling or something. Your sander shouldn't need much down pressure. If you find you need to use a lot of down pressure, you probably have worn out your pad. And you heard it load down there a bit. And it wasn't because I was pressing down, really. I was tilting the sander a little. I wanted to sand this seam a bit more, and that does put pressure on that area, but I just kind of tilted my pressure toward you here, and that's why the sander loaded a little bit. I'll show you again. now that is as perfectly flush as a person could expect. That's smooth, it's not chippy, it's not slivery, so that won't be dangerous for the customer, who is my wife and myself. So I'm dealing with this top trim here. I've been thinking about this top trim a lot. This is a 1 inch out here. The bottom trim and the stiles here is a 1/2 inch trim. So it's going to meet up a lot like that. And I think that'll look just fine. However, it's a little boring. I need this 1 inch width. That's part of the overall width of the bed. However, I don't need this brutalist square corner. So I have an idea for that. So I've got a profile bed in my router, and I'm going to run a test here on this little piece of offcut. I have some 2-sided tape just holding it up here to work on it. It's nice height, it's eye level. So the plan is to route vertically against this, to cut this profile here in this corner. So this corner is this corner. This is the top, this is the bottom. So I'm just going to route along here. And this is real time, so you're going to see the effects just as soon as I do. This router bit, it's kind of an interesting little router bit. And it has a bearing here, which will run against this side and give me a nice even profile there. Alright, let's do this. It's an interesting little detail. I'm going to lower the bit a little more profile on it. That should work. Let's try that. It's hard to see, but I think it'll work just fine. So a little bit of a lip and a cove, and convex cove, and then a round over at the bottom. I think that'll work. Had I planned this out beforehand, I would have done this on the router table, because I have one shot at this. If I mess this up, it's messed up. I need support for the router. So I'm wondering if this will give me said support. To be pretty straight, match that all the way along. Okay, the most appropriate piece of lumber I could find was outside. It's a little bit of a wetness to it here, and since this is a saw stop, I have to be sure to deactivate the safety brake. I don't like doing that, but I have to cut this, and we'll just be extra careful. I got the blade out quite a ways to cut it through like this too. So we'll run this through. That'll be 1 inch, and then I can screw it to that bed temporarily. It takes 2 hands to start this thing without the blade brake. You have to turn a key and then start it and hold the key and everything. It's real. You can't do it by accident for sure. It's hard enough to do on purpose. Alright, what I'm trying to do here is I want to install this to give me support for the router. The router is going to run this way, so I need this to be, you know, anywhere in here. So we only need a couple inches of space. And I can't clamp it on because two things. The clamps would be in the way here. And again, I need a 75, 76 inch clamp. That's more clamp than I have, and the clamp would be in the way anyway. I'm going to screw it on here. Again, it's not critical where it goes. A couple inches. If it's too close, it'll just cut a detail into the scrap. I know, some fancy looking scrap. This is going to do way more for me than this, but this is certainly not going to hurt, so definitely leave it there. See how this feels. I have a really good view of it. It's very stable, right to the end here. All right, that's going to work. Let's do this. I think that looks okay. That's what the profile is going to look like when that piece of trim matches up. Just a little bit of an interesting detail to break up just the square brutality of the design. Something that's a little bit nice. You saw me make multiple passes. Normally, I've been using a router since I was probably, I don't know, 10 years old. So I kind of do some things in an unconventional way that work for me. And normally you would set the router and you would do a pass, and then you'd set a little deeper and do a pass, and you'd sneak up on the depth. I find that you know, when I have to do 4 different pieces like this, the resulting depth may not be the same. I need these two to be real close because they're going to meet in the middle. So what I did was I just did that manually. I just kind of did a skim cut, trying to control the router to not go too deep. And once I got most of the way down, then I could do a fast finish cut. It makes a nice cut. And most importantly, it doesn't burn the oak. If I were to do that all in one pass, you can see on my test piece here, but I did burn it. I wasn't too concerned about burning it here, but you know, if I were to burn that, I need to sand it. I need to sand those burn marks out. This is a kind of a delicate detail, especially this little ridge. You could sand that off pretty easily, and also getting into coves and sanding rounds and stuff. It's something that you should avoid. It's difficult and it's easy to screw up your finished product. So that is why I did that. I need to only do this 3 more times. Isn't that good news? What are you going to do? I really should have done this in a router table when I started. The problem you run into if you mill this before is clamping it. So now I'm missing half of this profile to clamp on. This probably still would have worked okay because I have a flat surface there on which to clamp. So there's always compromises, but this is what we have. It's glued on there, and this is how we'll have to do it. Here we go again. Okay, a little more sanding. More sanding here.